we have Nick Baty, and he is talking about preventing digitally sourced patient harm, managing cyber risks through digitally enabled medical devices life cycle. Super important topic. Really excited to hear it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for having me. As you can tell by my accent, I am from the other island. But I was, in a moment of weakness, I was invited to come across and have a talk. So that's why I'm here. So I'm talking about digitally sourced patient harm, or as I often like to call it, how your wearable will kill you. So a little about me. I live in Dunedin, so anyone been in New Zealand know where Dunedin is? It's basically we fight off penguins and polar bears on a daily basis. No, not really. But I'm lucky enough to live there. I work there full-time remotely for Bastion, who are based in Wellington and Auckland. Foolishly, they basically decided, right, we're going to keep him in the South Island because he's just no good to anyone else. But this is, the reason I've done this talk is because it's kind of made up of my hair-pulling, cringy moments, because I had a lovely, long, flowing beard and lots of long hair when I started working for the Ministry of Health, and after 2 years, I am the shattered husk of a man that you see before you. Not least of which because I was going around hospitals and GP clinics and looking at all the machines that go ping and going, there's some problems here with how people do things. And as I talk to more and more people, whether they be clinical engineers or IT professionals or hospital administrators, I said, you've got some challenges with this technology there. And they're like, why? I said, because if it's not managed, it could well kill your patients. And they're, ooh, that's not good. So, but the problem is it's not well understood, and it has the greatest propensity, generally speaking, to cause significant harm. So there's big old question marks, and I guess that's what I'm here to talk about today, and a bit of a call to action. So a little bit about me. I was the Chief Cybersecurity Advisor at the Ministry of Health in New Zealand for a couple of years, and my official title and responsibility was raising New Zealand's cybersecurity maturity in the public and private health sectors. And I was the only one that did it. So once I got to lunchtime and I'd done that job, I found something else to do with my time. And then I decided that my wife, who's a Dunedin girl, I will move down to Dunedin and go and work for a managed service provider. So I joined the dark side of the farce and became a principal security consultant and fooled them. And then prior to that, I worked for the agency that shall not be acknowledged, otherwise known as the ASD equivalent in New Zealand. So yeah, we do that sort of stuff too. But my claim to fame, in your respect, if you've got any Canberrans here, I did my master's degree at ANU, so I have a very soft spot for the city and that particular university. So it's great. I was here for the fires, which wasn't fun, but you know, that was 1,000 years ago. So what we're going to cover off today. What is a device? And it's not necessarily what you think it is. What are the threat actors and motivators? What are the challenges associated with medical devices today? What's the current posture of medical devices in generally? What sort of recent compromises? You can't have a cybersecurity presentation unless you have some good war stories. What's a life cycle based approach, implementation and adoption, and next steps? I should acknowledge, well, ahead of time, I had to have some therapy prior to this because the TGA in Australia does it very well, and everything a part of my national being, having to acknowledge that in a public forum here was really painful. So I'm actually having to work on that. But certainly the TGA and working with ACSC have put together some really good guidance, and for both the industry and also for consumers around how to take a sensible approach towards managing medical device security. And it was based on that basis that a lot of the things we see here today. So let's have a potted history. So in New Zealand, bless us, the medical device definition is based on legislation dated 1981, so when Adam and I was a boy, and basically it's related to the definition of a medical device in that context is any device, instrument, apparatus intended to be used on or for human beings for a therapeutic purpose. So really specific definition. Really specific. In Australia, you guys are considerably better because you've actually got a really clear definition both in terms of things like surgical mesh, but also electronic technologies, both in terms of implantables and other associated technologies in terms of delivering therapeutic care. But what's also really great is you have 15 essential principles as part of it. I love the principles you guys do. It's kind of like the Warren of Fitness rules the road. If you don't follow this, you're going to die. So essentially, a good at least half those principles is based on what they call quality and assurance. So it gave very clear legislatively bound guidelines for how device manufacturers and device operators need to manage and operate and oversee and govern this technology. So huge difference, which is why I was like mega in love with the TGA guidelines. I'm like, how can we, push it across the ditch. But as we kind of see, some of the guidelines and things, of things we're seeing in terms of what is a device aren't necessarily what you see. So wearables like this, they're known as medical devices because particularly some of their algorithms and programs, they're now classified as what's called software as a medical device. So algorithms and for the clinical diagnoses of things like Apple Health, Google Health, other applications associated with performing diagnostic functions, clinicians are making clinical care decisions based on that information. So don't bother fudging your running scores when you're out for a run because the doctors will give you the wrong medicine, so just bear that in mind. And then you've got things through like infusion pumps, operating theatre stuff, you're starting to get nanotechnologies, all sorts of implantables. So it's not just the pacemakers, it's almost anything that has a therapeutic process. So it's almost the sky's the limit. And the digital health industry in New Zealand and Australia is evolving so quickly. So, recently it was the evolution of public cloud and the role of web-based and cloud-based hosted applications. Now we're seeing AI being actively used in diagnostic decision-making and what the implications are for that. So basically, I'm like Johnny Five and Skynet are going to be my doctor next, so we're stuffed. So there was working out what we do next. Oversight in New Zealand and Australia, as I say, bless us. We have got, there's an organisation, a government agency in New Zealand called Pharmac, who are essentially responsible for procuring medicines and medical devices in New Zealand. And they are responsible essentially for setting out the terms and contractual conditions. I may have had some robust conversations with them in a past life where I explained what their duty of care was around this particular issue, and they didn't align with my views. I'm not sure why. But essentially their view was we buy medicines and we are a procurement agency. But I say, well, if you have the ability to influence commercial outcomes, therefore you should be putting assurance standards into those contracts and actually compelling those vendors to apply a duty of care at the beginning. And they went, no, that's not our job. And I said, why? Never got a decent answer. What you do have in Australia, though, which is great, you've got the Therapeutic Goods Authority, and they govern actively and closely both what industry can bring into Australia, but also in terms of how it's deployed and what the through-line support looks like. So again, woo for the West Island, which is awesome. And in New Zealand, we've got the One database, which is a fairly old website that's all volunteer-based. And when I was working with the medical device team in the Ministry of Health, I'm like, cybersecurity, what are you going to do about it? I said, and they were fantastic what they did, but it was kind of like cyber spelled with an S, right? I said, yeah. So we can work on that basis. But, what are the things that, keep you up at night and causing problems? So, ironically, although medical device is not OT and it's not IT and it's kind of smashed together, it's actually a lot of the threats and exploitations are very much the sort of things we normally see as a matter of course in other domains. So remote access exploitation. Why? Because they can. But the thing is these devices are not designed with security in mind. And it's not that they're making a deliberate decision to avoid security. In many cases, it just doesn't occur to them. Historically, they're getting much better now, but certainly in the recent past, it wasn't a course of action they'd normally proceed, because putting encryption in place slows down the time for product going to market. Putting additional layers in there can create a really bad user experience for doctors or for allied health professionals or for healthcare consumers. So if there was anything that was going to impact on the functional outcomes and the user experience was bad. And sometimes when you look at these things, they're like, well, what's the likelihood of that happening? And of course, me being a GRC specialist, by the way, GRC specialist at HackerCon, yay, it's actually a case of these guys here are kind of going, well, what's the likelihood of that happening? I'm going, likelihood, risk. Ooh, let's do the sums on that one. So maybe the likelihood's low, but the impact's going to be pretty catastrophic in some cases. Remote access exploitation, wireless access compromise. So anytime you see someone walking around the hospital with a mobile phone in their hand, you're like, what are they going to do to me? Outdated software and firmware. I think I've told some of my colleagues the story, but I've been into hospitals in New Zealand where there was a brand new MRI machine that had hard-coded credentials of admin and password at SSW0RD and operating system. Anyone want to guess how old it might be? XP. Thank you, XP. So it's brand new and it's broken. Yeah, good capital investment, that. And then they're going to segregate it and they're going to manage it. And then it's like, I don't have time for this, because invariably healthcare IT teams are massively overworked. I know they'll be the same here, and they don't have necessarily the technology and capabilities, because they're like, it's a network device. It's like And then often they can only be upgraded through someone flying from here with a removable media and going, if I plug this in here, I'll update it. I'm going, not on your life. But then that's sometimes the only option because, of course, the vendors control the ecosystem. So it's like, that brings a whole new determination to supply chain risk, I'll tell you that for nothing. And then compromised host networks. So you see medical devices being compromised, which would mean they'll jump from that to other parts of your network because, of course, every single network is never flat and is entirely segregated all the time. I'm right? Yes, I am. Compromised host networks. So it's like the thing that's going to keep you alive is going to kill everything else. There's something Freudian in that, I'm sure there is. Weak access controls, sometimes no access controls. Hard-coded creds, no authentication, because why? Because it's expensive and it's difficult. In terms of why it happens, financial and political gain. There were, I saw, in media at the time, who remembers, probably might in the health sector feels, remember the Sing Health breach, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago? Huge part of the Singaporean health system was breached, massive amounts of PII was gone. They determined one of the key targets of that was the Singaporean Prime Minister's health details. So let's take a sledgehammer to the tiniest walnut possible, but that's what the motivation is. Generating disruption, yeah. Ever tried to work within a hospital IT team? I'd like to do some critical patching. The CVE's 9. Bah, ha, ha, ha. Find a good time to take a hospital offline. It's not going to happen. That's why cookies, donuts, and lots of beer are really good between your security team, your IT guys, and the chief medical officer. Unless you have that conversation, you're not going anywhere. Intellectual property theft. Why would they want to steal my stuff? Because they can. Reputational damage. It's not to name any names, but you think of a few medical device providers and developers over the years that have had major sort of epic failures. It's like, yeah, do I want to buy that stuff? Sometimes you don't have a choice, but it's high stakes. There's a lot of money in this sort of stuff. Harm individuals. Increase personal credibility, because you want to have the swagger because you were awesome. So it's kind of the way it is. So why do they present major security challenges? Well, so for those of you who are devs in this audience, prepare to cringe. So things like legacy operating systems and software, incompatibility between systems, these vulnerabilities such as misconfiguration, security holes. Most of the patent and software libraries are open source. So it's like, hey, keys to the kingdom, thank you. Because at the end of the day, we want to share and grow and develop and all that sort of stuff. Lack of, software updates, medical devices themselves, as I said, don't have basic security in place. It's like, TLS what? 0.1? Not quite like that, but it can feel a bit like that at times. And many times the challenges are also on the basis that, one of these solutions are web hosted. So it's like you've got a web application that sits on these devices here. Did you pen test it? Why would I want to do that? Okay. And you get a pen test. Oh, I'll get to those findings when I get to them. So why did you pay for it in the first place? That's an entirely different philosophical discussion, but yeah. And as I said, they can be used to attack other sections of the health sector's organisational network. Sorry, I've got some notes here because I'm a man. I can only protest one thing at a time, so I'll just manage that as I go. Potential harm to patients and users from adverse medical device security events. So those of you who have been in hospitals, you might, generally when nurses and doctors, or mainly the nurses, are dispensing meds on the ward, they'll have what's called a PICS machine. It looks like a little filing cabinet with a computer face in there. So what they do is when they scan your barcode on your arm to get the drugs to make sure you are getting the right drugs you should be getting, they'll then replicate that in the PICS machine, and it pops a little drawer out and says, hey, this is the drugs for Nick. But then these machines themselves can be compromised. So I'm going, well, if I can compromise the patient information and says that he needs this particular drug and not that sort of particular drug, and it causes issues with there, this is where the high levels in the health sector becomes to do with integrity and availability. It's kind of like, well, because the nursing staff wouldn't know anything other, they've got absolute trust that this is all going to work. And then they'll get the drugs, and then we find out why there's a problem. And because that's the biggest challenge with these is because it looks and feels safe, they assume it is, and that's a reasonable assumption to make. But it's someone who might have executed an RCE, fiddled with a bit of stuff, or messed with the back-end protocols. All of a sudden, you've got some very serious, potentially life-threatening, life-ending consequences on your hands. Then, of course, there's the slightly lesser boring issue of patient data being compromised and stolen screeds. That's often when you're going for the large cloud-based applications, the back end, and the clinician sitting somewhere on a beach in Fiji going, oh, I'll just put into that stuff there. And before you're going, that's not what he or she actually did. So it's kind of like the man in the middle attack on steroids and sometimes as well. And one of the biggest challenges is there's just a simple lack of awareness amongst different parts of the health sector of the challenges these produce. And unless they look at it in a life cycle perspective, which is why I'm a big fan of that, they look at discrete parts, and it's really difficult to work out how it comes together. Because my view, cybersecurity is a team sport. No one sits on the bench. Everyone plays the full game. Coined it here. No one else can take that phrase. But that's very much the case of where it has to be. So, more of the juicy stuff. What is actually going on in this space? Why is it so problematic? So the challenge really here is that we've got different classes of medical device. This is from a study I found just before I came over. From 2023, State of Cybersecurity of Medical Devices and Healthcare Systems. It was a joint report done by some security research organisations in the States along with the Health ISAC. So we're finding that up to 82% of devices carry out data operating systems. And bear in mind, these operating systems aren't always necessarily that easy to work with or adjust, because of course, remember what I said about the ecosystem, the vendors set it up for them to work on. It's not intended for the guys who actually operate the devices necessarily to interact with them. They're just supposed to make the buttons go ping. So the IT guys who inherit this go, yay. Lots of fun there. As you say, it's difficult to update them. So the fact that you can't always do it over the air, you've actually got to do it manually with media, is quite challenging. And again, you can't change, Bob's dog at password type thing for credentials. You're kind of stuffed with that. But then if you look a little further, we're looking at the types of classes of medical devices. So when you're starting to get into some of the class 3 ones like pacemakers, heart valves, implantable devices or anaesthesia machines, class 2, that gets a bit binary, excuse the expression, gets pretty real in terms of actually, this isn't a theoretical conversation anymore, this is something that can really happen. And it can be pretty alarming. And that's what I'm saying, most people don't understand this sort of stuff could potentially happen, and then when they look at it, they're going, well, we should probably do something about that, but it's very difficult to do something about that by yourself. So to sort of put things in slightly more contrast, you're looking at things like implantable cardiovascular defibrillators or surgical theatre type stuff. So these are the products, the number of products that were assessed in that study. And these are the number of vulnerabilities, like medical monitoring telemetry, like blood pressure, glucose monitors, cardiac machines, 129 vulnerabilities out of 89 products. So multiple products have got more than one vulnerability in there. And some of the CVE scores, 7, 8, and that sort of thing. So it's pretty gnarly stuff. And then again, type of stuff we're seeing in terms of the types of vulnerabilities, we're seeing the input validations, improper authentication, recall notices, because I don't know if anyone knows about in the healthcare system, to get a recall to actually execute properly is a hugely detailed process. There's be checks and balances, there's quite a lot of legal involvement in that sort of thing there, so it's not a trivial matter at all. And of course, the companies have to do it, they're concerned about market share and what it means to them reputationally, so not a trivial activity at all. In terms of uncontrolled resource consumption, any number of things. So again, these aren't academic issues. And again, which are the devices that are most, seem most secure, which means when you go into the hospital, you never look the same way again. So that's an infusion pump on the far left there. That's the one that sits beside the bed and pumps the IV through the IV into your cannula. Then you've got ultrasound machines for mums and bubs and the like, but not always, but generally. Patient monitors, medical dispensers, that's the PICS machine I was talking about before. Internet gateways, IP cameras, although why you'd have cameras inside the ward is an entirely separate conversation. I'm quite worked that one out yet. PACS machines and computerized. So the PACS machines and the DICOM workstations, what they are is, the PACS server is when you go to get a CT machine, a CT image or an MRI image, all those high resolution images, which ultimately create up to petabytes of space, they're stored on PACS servers, sometimes on-prem, sometimes in the cloud. And then you've got the DICOM workstation, which is actually the workstation that a radiologist will work at and observe and make the diagnostic decisions, or the oncologists. Now, the reason I've got a little red star there, and this is a great one, is when I was the Ministry of Health, about a year into my time there, we received a notification from, I think it was from CISA and from the MITRE team, that the DICOM base code line the source code, or the base standard for rendering the DICOM images, they'd found a vulnerability of 7.8, I think it was almost up to 8 in it globally, and they had to work out how they were going to encourage all the healthcare providers to appropriately patch and overcome that vulnerability. There were also instances that they identified that attackers had exploited that vulnerability and had gone and maliciously altered some of the clinical images. So we potentially had clinicians making what they thought were sound clinical decisions on maliciously altered imagery. So again, when they're placing absolute trust in their technology and that sort of activity can occur, it boggles the mind, inaccurate cancer diagnoses or anything like that could have potentially occurred. So that's kind of the vector we're talking around for some of this sort of stuff. That always makes everyone go, it's great. In terms of, so in the last sort of few years, we've seen, which should be no surprise to people, we've seen an almost 700 to 800% increase in cyber attacks on the health sector globally since 2021. The industry has experienced the highest average percentage of attempted intrusions in 2022 has been the healthcare sector. And in IoMT, Internet of Medical Things devices, have seen a 123% increase in vulnerabilities and potential exploitations in the last 2 or 3 years as well. Because not that well understood, if you can access them, they're public internet facing, which in some cases they have to be for the purposes of vendor support and the like, they're not well understood. And then you've got people, the ecosystem within the business doesn't know how to interact with properly on it, and they've all got different parts of responsibilities. And these issues like, in 2022, the PTC Exceeder agent desktop server, high levels of vulnerabilities, and these to do with, I think, there was some dispensing of some medical drugs and that sort of thing. Bluetooth, low power energy vulnerability, because those in the industry will remember a few years ago, Bluetooth, there was some ongoing exploitation issues and vulnerabilities. So they're finding that a lot of these devices can't accommodate the more modern version of Bluetooth, so they're now stuck with low power energy ones where you can go past and just potentially recompile the code sitting inside these devices. In fact, I heard instances of stories. Dick Cheney had a pacemaker, and they were concerned that someone would get close enough to him, potentially alter the imagery and the details there as well. Insulin pumps, WannaCry, Paul Industry on PACS machines, anaesthesia delivery machines. Barnaby Jack, a Kiwi as well. He did some really interesting demonstrations. If you look up his details, that can be quite good. Now, on the home stretch, so the challenge, as I've said there, it needs to be a team-based approach to device safety and effectiveness, and a partnership-based approach. So device manufacturers, Pharmac, MedSafe, or TJ in Australia, Te Whatu Ora, which is our equivalent to some of the Australian Digital Health Association, territory and state governments, and central government, all working together to apply knowledge, leadership and stewardship, so understanding how can we deliver this, how can we deliver these outcomes that make sense. But the big challenge is culturally speaking, it's not well understood. The challenge is mainly it's not understood by our health system, it's not understood by the procurement teams that well, and everyone's stretched and everyone's stressed, and no one actually kind of works out which problem it is. There's also a serious lack of cybersecurity professional capability, certainly in New Zealand, within health sector procurement and oversight. There's just not enough smart bodies to go around in that regard. The lack of capacity in New Zealand particularly, and potentially in Australia as well. Commercial imperatives when cybersecurity is expensive and difficult and makes it a more difficult thing to deliver to market. It slows that down. And of course also, the size of New Zealand and Australia's digital health markets are really, really small for some of these providers when you consider they're used to working in Asia or in the States and Europe. So if you make it too difficult for them to move into these markets, they just won't bring the technology here, which means the patients miss out on some of this life-saving care. So I guess in the home stretch, what are we going to do about it? Providing practical and collaborative support. So if you do end up working with health sector agencies that are involved in this space, support them, encourage them to ask the right questions, help devise these questions for them. Don't say that's a real problem. You're saying, well, I know you've got to deal with this and it's complex, let me help you. Encourage responsible behaviour. There's some really good user guidelines from the Department of Homeland Affairs here in Australia, along with TGA, around how to manage IoT complexities securely. There's a lot of really good guidance out there. It's really easily available. It's all free. And again, engage with those healthcare providers. Make them aware of this stuff. Provide support. Encourage them to go on a journey with you, and particularly work with the procurement teams and understand how the different system fits together. And encourage them to ask effective risk discovery questions, because at the end of the day, it is a team sport. And at the end of the day, we're all working for patients. And that's me. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.